Welcome to the Learning and Development Podcast, sponsored by Infopro Learning. As always, I'm your host, Nolan Hout. Joining me today, we have Julie Dirksen, author of one of the best-selling instructional design books of all time, Designed for How People Learn. It's an incredibly popular book. Although it was written, I think, maybe a decade ago or so, there's been new releases, and it continues to be popular today. She's also an internationally recognized speaker and learning consultant on a wide range of topics, but really has a special focus on incorporating behavioral science into learning interventions. Today, we're going to talk to Julie about a little bit of all things learning design, from diagnosing the problem, creating sound design strategy, reducing cognitive load. And if it sounds like a lot, it's because it is. So we'll stop wasting time and meet Julie to come in here and bring some information. Julie, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
The first thing that we always like to do when we start is just to learn a little bit more about our guests. Obviously, as a best-selling author and international speaker, you didn't start your career there. How did you get into this world of learning and development?
Well, I feel like the origin story for a lot of people is what I sort of describe as, hey, you're a good customer service rep. We're going to let you train the other customer service reps, which, people come at it from domain knowledge. They know a lot about their topic. They're the person who's
Totally.
helpful. There's the person who's, kind of been giving other people, guidance on how to do it, that gets tapped to then come and be the training person. And that's more or less how that's kind of how it happened. I was doing data entry for a finance company when I was in college as a part-time job. And then I graduated in the early 90s, so a long time ago, but it was not a very good economy. And so they said, hey, you want to train other people how to do data entry? And I said, yeah, okay. I'd also been doing a certificate in teaching English as a foreign language. And so I was interested in the education piece. And then when I got into it, I found what I really liked was the design piece of it, right? Like, how do we
Mm,
create courses? What do we think about? How do we put this all stuff together? How do we use technology to support it? And that wound up being the part that I kind of enjoyed the most. I still like delivering workshops. I still do a certain amount of it, but I
right.
was not enough of an effusive extrovert to want to be a trainer full time. But the design piece I really loved,
Got
and so I went to graduate school in the late 90s to do instructional systems technology at Indiana University, which at the time was one of the biggest, and probably still is one of the biggest kind of instructional design programs.
Yeah.
And spent a bunch of time at there, kind of over in what we weren't even calling user experience design yet. It wasn't UX, it was still human computer interaction. So how do we change the technology to support performance along with, so I think you kind of get it from both sides, right? Like, how do I make the technology or the environment support what we want people to do as much as possible? And how do you train people to be able to do those things? And so I think
hmm
I've always had that perspective a little bit, which is, sure, you can train people, but it doesn't fix a bad computer system. So
Yeah, so it seems like, and what's interesting is it seems like you have this, I don't know, core in you to just remain like, oh, I really want to understand how this thing works. Not just at like a superficial level, but like I really need to understand the nuance of this, or the science, I should say, not nuance, the science
yeah.
behind how are people learning this way. And that's kind of the praise I know that you've gotten in your book, is it's very, backed by this is what's working, this is what's right. So that's great. Well, and thanks for sharing. Getting into the podcast, one of the first things that we really wanted to talk about, if we're going to kind of follow this story of how do we actually create these experiences and these programs that make an impact that we were just talking about, we have to start with diagnosing what that
hmm
problem is.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about how we go about diagnosing the real learning problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we we have kind of a recurring theme as an industry around, not being an order taker and not just kind of going, okay, when somebody shows up and says, we
hmm
want customer service training or something like that. And the real challenge is getting a good statement of what the problem is that they're trying to solve.
Yeah.
And that's not always that easy to do because it assumes a
No.
few things. It assumes that they actually know what problem they're trying to solve rather than we're just generally unhappy with how it's
Uh,
going. Um, and getting people to be really specific about it. And I always talk about, when I'm doing kind of 101 workshops, I always talk about, are you getting handed a problem to solve, or are you getting handed a solution to implement? If you're getting handed a solution to implement, it might look like, hey, we need sales training. Well, okay, what are they doing or not doing that's working right now, and what do we need them to do differently? And oh, okay, you're really concerned about cross-selling, or you're really concerned about the fact that they're going in and starting to announce all the features and benefits of the product without asking the customer any questions first. Well, okay, great. Let's focus in on that piece of it, where you need to actually ask your customer about what their problems are and what they need help with before you start selling them solutions. Cool. That's fantastic. Let's talk about that how do we help support that behavior? And it might be that, it's a training problem, probably is. Training's probably an element of that, but it also might be, hey, the way the sales literature is configured,
designed or whatever.
doesn't support the behavior that we want people to do, which is to start with what are the customer challenges, So, or it might be that, we're incenting certain behaviors where, we're not giving people enough time because, the only thing we're counting is how many sales calls you do per day, and not, how much repeat business you get, which, the second one might be a better indicator of a really consultative sales approach than just how many sales calls did you cram in an 8-hour period. And so all of those things may be contributing to why people aren't, getting a good understanding of customer problems before they start selling stuff to them. But not all of those are training issues, you know.
Yeah, and I give an example. We were doing a rollout of a new customer facing software, kind of like a CRM, but it was back
Mm-hmm.
end and front end. So the customer service reps, and we were asking, what are the KPIs? How are we going to measure whether we
Mm-hmm.
did a good job? And they're like, well, the number one thing is, like, we just don't want people in the queue. Like, we just don't want a long queue. We want to get to the answers quickly. We're like, okay, cool. Like, we get that. So we're servicing quickly, but then what is the value driver?
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, well, why does it really matter? And I'm like, well, if you want people out of the queue, you kind of got to reduce talk time. But
Mm-hmm.
then you traditionally see a spike in, I don't know, or a decrease in first call resolution. And
Yeah.
so you're going to have people calling back in. So how are you
Mm-hmm.
motivating?
Right.
And and it was evident to that client that they needed to go back to their business and actually ask better questions. But that was a challenge. It really was. And I remember them saying, yeah, we went back and we weren't really able to get a straight answer. How have you seen organizations best go back to the business and say, I'm going to solve your problem for sure, but actually I think it might be incentive issue. Like, they're
Mm-hmm.
being incentivized on the wrong thing. How do you do that? Because you're kind of stepping outside of your, lane, if you
Mm-hmm.
would, in many
Yeah.
cases. How have you found the most success in educating the people in that?
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that I often think is like, we want to have that relationship with them up front where they trust us to kind of help
Yeah,
be
true.
partners
Yeah,
in solving their business problems. And sometimes you can make that happen on the first engagement. But honestly, a lot of it comes down to what's the relationship that you've built with them, right? Do
mm,
they see you as a partner in this, or do they just see you as a vendor that they're going to
right.
offload their training needs to and things like that? And so if you're working in an agency or something like that where you may only ever have one engagement with this client, I mean, in the ideal world, of course, we want our clients to come back to us for stuff, but
Yeah,
what can you do to sort of what can you do to sort of build that? And a lot of it is about the questions that you're asking. In your case, they were coming to you with a problem, but they actually had to go back to um
yeah,
their internal client to try to get some, because it is an interesting problem, right? Like, if we reduce talk time, but we increase, people calling back, then
right,
presumably they're just going to fill that queue up again.
right, right.
And now we're in a race to who can get them off the phone the fastest, not how do we have, how do we
Yeah,
have, how do we, so, because misaligned incentives happen a lot.
yeah,
They're a frequent
yeah.
issue.
But you
Um,
said something that was, like, so critical, I think, which is how you start the relationship is
Hmm.
really important. And
Yeah.
I'm having a lot of conversations and talking to a lot of leaders who realize that that they have this skill, but they need to make sure that they continue to frame this skill as, I'm helping with your performance problem. I'm not
Yeah.
necessarily helping with your learning problem. Learning is could be, maybe is the answer. But before that, I need to understand your business so
Yeah.
that I can better advise you on what the solution would be. And if that's your, we were joking before this call about kind of the proliferation of people selling, uh, you know, selling hammers and finding a bunch of nails that maybe didn't
Yes.
exist.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and so, like, I think a lot of it is just, can you, start with that they're recognizing that value is just, can I be a business driver and then back
Mhm.
into learning if that even becomes the thing.
Yeah. Like one of the things I always ask people is like, well, what budget line item is paying for you?
Yeah.
And what is
Yeah.
that? And if that's a budget line item and, this, again, it could go back to KPIs or,
Yeah.
OKRs or, any of these kinds of things. But it also goes to what's a win for the stakeholder that I'm working for, which may or may not equal what's best for the audience or something like that. But you do have to manage that. Like you do have to kind of at least consider. I was talking to somebody who really wanted to do better, better, more interactive, more scenario-based training, and he was trying to sell his boss on it. And his boss was like, "Look, we just need a quick win here." And he was really, the person I was talking to was really frustrated. And I'm like, yeah, but you're not listening to what they need too. Like I
Yeah.
love that you're trying to advocate for good learning experiences. I love that you're trying to, figure out how to do better learning design. That is something I'm deeply passionate about. I think that's great. But you just blew right past, your boss telling you this is the thing I need in order to, feel successful. And I'm not saying that they aren't, in opposition to each other because obviously faster and better don't always add up.
Yeah.
But the fact that you're not listening to, your boss is telling you something that's obviously really crucial, whether it's their KPIs or, their performance
Hmm.
review that they're concerned about, at this kind of thing. They need to figure this out. And so any solution that's going to work for both of you has to be a negotiation between those two. And I don't have enough information about their situation to identify, where can we meet both of those things, better quality but also faster. May may not meet up, but can we find any overlap on those two circles? So,
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, they say, better, faster, cheaper, choose two.
mhm,
And so a lot of times when you hear that, you kind of do have to find, okay, well, what is going to give? Which lever are we going to give? And that feeds right into kind of the next part. So once we've defined the problem, now we have to
mhm,
match the design strategy to the complexities of that problem. And we just talked about one of those things that factors into the equation. Maybe you could
mhm.
say that it shouldn't, but it absolutely does. Like, budget cycle, KPIs of the CEO,
Mhm.
whatever
Yeah.
promises have been made across the organization. So certainly there's those situational things that come up. But for the most part, when we're talking about designing something to match the complexity of the problem, it's more about, how deep is this problem and what are we trying to design? Can you talk a little bit about how you go about doing this?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I do, and we've got the learning objectives identified, and hopefully they're behavioral objectives. Like I always, I, you know, I think Bloom's taxonomy is an amazing tool, but I don't really use it that much myself because when you're in workplace learning, you're almost always dealing with the applied. What can they do
Yeah.
with this? And so the questions I always ask is this something that would happen in the real world? If they know this thing, what are they
Hmm.
going to do with it? And can I tell? Could I, is there a recognizable behavior that I can kind of evaluate and use to judge that, like, yes, they're successful at it? So if I say, oh, programmers need to understand, when JavaScript is an appropriate programming tool, Well, when are they going to use that? They're going to use it when they're evaluating a project, right?
Hmm.
So now my applied is programmers will be able to evaluate a project and determine if JavaScript is an appropriate programming tool. Sorry, this is going super nerdy,
No.
but nonetheless, like that framing helps because then it tells you what's the activity that they should be doing as part of the learning. Well, they should be looking at different
Yeah.
projects and matching them up to, appropriate programming, like what's the right programming tool to apply to this project. Like that's the thing we want them to do. And there's a number of different ways to kind of get to that. I was just talking to somebody about Kathy Moore's action mapping, which is nice, which is like business goal, the behaviors that support that business goal, the practice, the kind of practice that then helps people learn those behaviors, and then the information needed to do that practice. And so we
Mm.
put information last, as opposed to a
Yeah.
lot of curriculums where information is here's your list of topics that you need to train people on. So we start with the information and maybe we work our way into the application. But that's not it's not how most people are applying this stuff in the workplace.
No, no. It's
So
very like it's like traditional learning as, okay, I need to learn something. Let me get my encyclopedia off the shelf. Which one is it? Okay, but that's again, it's not people are expecting that knowledge in a much quicker turnaround time than they used
mhm.
to.
Yeah.
And like weaved in there, right? You mentioned, how are they going to apply it? Are you seeing AI play a factor in that? I mean, because it really touches all of those things, obviously, like information, but
Mhm.
specifically at the application layer, right? With a lot of talk about leveraging agents. Obviously, Workday just bought Sana
Yeah.
to implement and have essentially agents driving a lot of the back office. How is that being weaved into this kind of, a complex problem, but being able to deliver a point solution?
Well, the challenge with the AI is I think we've been promised that we can hand over, I think, to, like 100% of the tasks to the AI. And it's like, no, no.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
But can it be helpful? Sure. Like one of the things I always try to do when I'm doing a workshop for somebody is to use some of their learning objectives, use some of their tasks, try to translate some of the examples into their context because we know that like putting it within their context is going to improve transfer of the
Yeah.
information. And actually I've done stuff for a couple of like social service agencies or state agencies lately where I'm like, hey, give me give me 5 learning objectives and give me, this kind of information about it from this, here's the website where all their training materials are. Give me 5 things that are plausible in this environment.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then when I've taken them back to my clients and my stakeholders, they've been like, oh, yeah, these are pretty good, but no, don't use that one. We never talk about that. Or this one's
Hmm.
out of date. But those other ones, those are pretty good. And it's just saved a lot of time because usually I'd be
Yeah.
like, hey, guys, I need some learning objectives. Can you get those for me? And then they try, and I'm like, okay, let's try again. Let me give you more clear, guidance on what I'm really looking for. Okay, good, good, good. Now we're getting, and it'd be
Yeah.
like 4 or 5 back and forth, email sequences. And now I can just show up and be like, hey, this is what, the AI gave me. Are these right? Are these good? And they can kind of vet them quickly, but they understand what I'm looking for, and we can kind of move through it. And so, taking this and kind of going, all right, I have this general sales training. I want to apply it in this context with this product, with these things. Can you redo all of these, questions, or can you redo all these examples
Yeah.
and put it into the specific context of people selling, web services or something like that? And, it's pretty good at that stuff. I mean, it's not perfect. You still need to check it, but like that kind of taking something specific and customizing it for a particular audience, like, oh, kind of nice. This is actually easier. um, but I was watching a video just yesterday of somebody who is a graphic design instructor, and she kept mentioning that she's got, I don't know, 25 or 30 years experience in graphic design. And she
Mm.
had taken all of the clear prompt engineering and all this kind of stuff and was asking ChatGPT to teach her as, a faux beginner how to do graphic design. And she's pointing all the ways that it was terrible. And now granted, it was a super visual topic and ChatGPT doesn't play well with that, but
Yeah.
it was still just not good. It was, it asked her a million questions. It was very repetitious. It was really struggling with explanations and examples. It was just, it's not there yet. It's not there yet. Will that change? Maybe, but, um, one of the biggest issues with the AI stuff is it is still, and with the large language models, likely to always be something where you need that expertise to evaluate the outputs, which means we're never going to want to turn it loose, with beginners, because it's not enough. And so, you know, is it is it going to get to the point where I can totally let beginners kind of stumble around in it? Maybe, but I'm still skeptical, but we'll see. It's better. It's
Yeah.
better than it used
What?
to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just talking the other day, and there was this actor, Werner Herzog, was being
Mm,
interviewed by Conan O'Brien on his podcast, and he was saying it's like when I was a kid, I learned how to use math, and then I was given a calculator to apply it.
hmm. Yeah.
And I really think that's a good, analogy. When if I were to give my son a calculator and say, go learn math, in your multiplication tables, he would know how to use the calculator really well, but he would
Mhm.
never understand math. And if you ever took that away, he would never be able to leverage it, the core, knowledge that he
Mhm.
had. And he wouldn't be able to apply that into the next layer of math, right? The building blocks of calculus or algebra or whatever it is.
Mhm.
And so I think that's really where it's key. And I was thinking about it as we were going to talk today about kind of this, as the complexity of the problem gets higher, AI can simplify a lot of these highly technical things, especially for people
Mhm.
who are not in the field, but when we're trying to design something for somebody else, it can kind of make it more obtainable for us. But it is one of those things where as the topic becomes more complex, it's usually complex because there's a lot of nuance.
Mhm.
And if you kind of don't relate those two things and you're just thinking, oh, this is really complicated, is it a perfect use case for AI? It actually might be the inverse of it. Is, you actually need somebody to come in and change, like, I mean, and change that skill, um, to do something with it.
Yeah. Well, and by definition, because it's still so relatively new, um, what we've had sort of reliable, genuinely useful AI for like 3 years, somewhere in
Two and a
there. I
half
mean,
years.
2.5
Yeah,
years.
about
Thanks.
January of 2025.
Yeah, it was just coming out when I was writing my last book, which is an interesting time to be writing a book. I'm gonna hopefully write another one this winter, and it's gonna even be more interesting. But like what's the value of actually writing all the words on the page versus generating them? But the so by definition, the vast majority of people who are using AI in some kind of workplace context are people who know how to do their jobs.
Yeah,
And so therefore can use it's kind of I have a whole metaphor about like it's kind of like the scooter, right? You can just get there faster and
yeah,
and easier than you would if you were having to do the whole slog yourself. But you by definition have the expertise to evaluate and judge whether or not this is now are people do people have the discipline to do that? That is a whole different it's a whole different question because that sort of psychological stamina to check the outputs is not necessarily a historical strength of a lot of people. There's a reason
yeah,
why most of us need some external like proofreading when we're doing stuff.
totally.
But that is going to, change as we move forward, and there will be people using this to do things that they can't judge the outputs on it. And we know that that's not a great formula right now, but we're going to have to figure out how do we manage that, especially in organizations. What do I do if somebody's giving, them answers that they can't necessarily validate or verify?
Yeah, I talk with our so we have a gentleman who creates our who owns our leadership division of our organization. Not managing our leadership, but our product that we go and sell. And we talk a lot about AI and the use of AI coaching. And so like right now, we're a pretty firm believer that you cannot just give an AI coach to somebody and say, kind of say, go at it, right? Take the calculator example. We're a firm believer that you have to actually sit down and teach the person, I don't know, communication with clarity, whatever it is. They have to actually understand the core of what you're needing to do. Now, what an AI coach can then do is say, you may not apply this right away.
Hmm.
It may take you 3, 4 months. It may take you a year before you have to apply this.
Hmm.
Use it when at that moment. Use it as a
Yeah.
tool. Okay, now you know what? I know
Right.
what. God, it's been forever since I had to, uh,
Hmm.
identify the type of triangle, isosceles or obtuse or whatever. Like, but I know roughly what it is. Okay, so let me go in there and make some changes. And so, but then we also talk, and so this idea though, as you said, of like letting AI loose and what happens when it gives the wrong answer. I myself am a little bit, I don't really know where I stand because I also feel like, well, what's the alternative? Like, where are they going for
Hmm.
those answers today? Right? We
Yeah.
know managers
Yeah.
aren't giving them any real coaching. They're not
Hmm.
really giving that. Nobody's got the time to do it. So it's like, well, is this cheap version of this leadership coach better than no leadership
No.
coach, or
Yeah. Yeah.
or better than the leadership coach that nobody wants?
Yeah.
Because there's bad coach, there's really bad coaches. There's coaches that do a
Hmm.
lot more harm than they do good. I don't know. I don't know. I still don't even know where I land on that. But I think again, bring it back when we talk about like that complexity. If you're designing something, maybe think back to, okay, do I need to teach them 2 times 3 before I give them the calculator? That might be an easy.
Well, and I mean, I so K-12 is so not my area of expertise, but my memory is there is actually data that says that that's true. If you want people to be able
Yeah,
to do higher mathematics, having a good sense of your multiplication
it's
tables
totally
is
true.
one of the things
Yeah.
that you need to have before you get there. And because that's actually been an interesting question, kind of, I think my whole professional life was, is there any argument ever for making people memorize things? Because we've
Yeah.
got so many technology-based resources for accessing information, and speed of access is definitely a variable. Like, how quickly do you need to be able to
Hmm.
use the information? How easy is it to look it up? How easy is it to access it? Those kinds of things. And kind of being on the right side of the balance for that. But you need people to have, the foundational knowledge to sort of do the remixing at the higher orders, right? So if you don't know lots of the foundational pieces, you can't necessarily come up with complex solutions to a problem, or manage all of the
Yeah.
variables that are kind of coming at you. And so what does that all need to look like? And I was talking to a group yesterday where it was mostly instructional designers for higher education, and I'm like, I'm grateful not to be in their shoes right now, because
Oh yeah.
they're enormously, they have the enormous issue that they're facing of, how do you construct assignments where it's not the easiest answers to just feed it into ChatGPT and, trot the results out. Like, we know that there's a great little talk by Rory Sutherland, who does a lot on like creativity and kind of behavioral
Mm.
science. He's an advertising guy, but he talks about like having good student essays as a product was never the point. The point was
Yeah.
always, nobody wants your student essays. Like, no, it was never about the product. It was always about the process. And so having we've created a whole system where grades are the ultimate output. And of course, students want to take the fastest way to getting the grade,
Yeah.
and so one of the things we're dealing with here is really having to reassess the entire way that we motivate student performance, to getting them engaged with, hey, if the learning isn't kind of hard and I'm not having to wrangle with difficult things, I'm not developing the mental kind of capacity to manage difficult stuff in the world. And yes, I'm going to have AI as a tool later to shortcut some of this stuff.
Hmm.
But again, the whole issue of, we need you to be able to make judgments about the output, since we need you to have the skill set to do that. And I I I mean, I think some students get it and they're buying in, but I was a procrastinating college student. Would I be tempted
Yeah. I mean,
occasionally?
you would
Yeah, probably,
our world is designed. and humans are designed to use the least amount of energy to get the
Hmm.
maximum impact. You're not going to be
Hmm.
able to fight that. Like that is a losing proposition.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I never thought like for multiplication, you're like, memory versus learning, but I kind of feel like memorizing your times tables is kind of like memorizing the alphabet. Like it is the
Hmm.
fundamental of it. But then
Yeah.
something you mentioned is that, how do we measure the output? It's really interesting because I do wonder if, like, gosh, I was terrible at memorizing, probably because I was such a procrastinator and it's really hard to like memorize things once,
Hmm.
or at least it is
Yeah.
for me. I'm sure that somebody could tell me otherwise, but I couldn't. And I think back, I'm like, and I always thought that was such a cheap teacher that made so much focus on, can you memorize every country's name in Europe? I
Yeah.
was like, that is so cheap.
Hmm.
Talk to me about the application of, and so I do wonder if it actually forces a higher level of thinking, which is really what is in short supply, like critical thinking skills,
Hmm.
being able to they say that the literacy rate of America, people can read the article, they can understand it, but they can't tell you what the author is trying to convince you to do.
Yeah.
They're
Interesting.
not able to understand what is behind the source of the person.
Yeah.
And so that's in short supply. Yes, we can read. Yes, we can answer a question on it. But can
Hmm.
we think critically about why the article was written in the first place, or what motive author might have? Or is this person trying to convince me something that they shouldn't be? Is this fact? Is this fiction? Our ability to determine that is getting worse. And
Yeah.
so I wonder, as a byproduct of AI making teachers' lives hell, because I'm sure it is hell. There's no getting around it. I wonder if eventually the byproduct, though, is that we get to this higher level of thinking. This is, you know,
It's an interesting question because yeah, there's so many things that we learn as kind of patterns.
yeah.
And I don't know if we always give enough credit to those. Like factual information. I was reviewing a it was a tool for training managerial skills the other day, and it had a bunch of questions in there where it was like it was factual information based on some content that had been there. So, like
Mm,
people typically remember 15%, 20%, 25% of
right.
blah, 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 or something. And I was just like, who cares? This isn't the thing. Like why are we asking this? Why are we asking people what the percentage is? Like, ask them
Yeah.
to apply it, ask them to think about how they're going to use it. And so, this is one of the kind of, to go back to kind of where we started on this stuff is like, how do you match up interventions to the need? And one of the big things that is always an issue is kind of moving people beyond those lower level, Bloom's taxonomy, identify, define,
Yeah.
describe, kinds of
Yeah.
learning objectives, because it's like, I don't care if you can list this thing. I care if you can use it to
Use
do
it.
a thing. And that is actually interesting in terms of things like memorization tasks and stuff. Like whenever we would do, because like I have a gap model where I'm like, here, think about what the gap is between current performance and future performance. And it's an expansion of KSA. So this has all been out there
Yeah.
in the world. But like if it's a knowledge gap, they just need to know something in order to be able to do it. And when I say know something, what do you mean by that, right? Like is it know it conceptually or know it like I can summon it out of my mind at will if I
Mm,
need it. And it was always hard to find examples of something that's just a knowledge problem because most things aren't.
mm,
One of the ones we used a lot was like learning airport codes for customer service reps for like airlines or something.
yeah.
Their conversation's going to be easier if they don't have to stop and look up every airport code. But the truth is, like, we can do a little game to memorize airport codes, and that's fine. But honestly, a lot of it's going to come from use, right? Like, I know a lot of airport codes
Absolutely.
now, but those are just because I keep looking up. I have to go to Orlando a lot for
And,
conferences. I know
yeah, and
the
you
I know
travel.
the
Yeah.
airport code, right? Um,
Do you know Spokane's? I
I
will
do
give
not.
you
I
five
do not
dollars if
know
you can guess.
Spokane.
Okay.
No. Yeah.
It's GEG, which
Oh,
makes no sense in the world. The
yeah,
airport is
because
not
weird. They're
it's
weird how
not
they come up
anything
with
to do
these.
with the name of the airport. I should look that up, but now that you said that, I should look that up. That's an
Yeah, yeah,
interesting
yeah.
thing to
There's an
Google.
explanation somewhere. It came from the name of something or whatever,
Yeah.
usually. But it's
Anyway,
but it's
sorry.
not a consistent method. Like there's no
Okay.
consistent
Okay.
method for
Yeah.
airport codes. Um, but you know, like, yes, if I can create a game and you can memorize a bunch of airport codes, you'll probably function better. But honestly, they won't really become automatic until you've been on the job for a while and you just have to keep using these over and over again. Um, so is there value in the memorization? Probably. Is it better when you apply it? I was looking around, I was doing a presentation on learning games, and I was looking around for some learning games, and I found this little map game where you could memorize all the countries in Africa. And I
Okay.
was like, well, now I immediately want to memorize all the countries in Africa. And the truth is, like, I could get pretty good at it. I don't think I was ever 100%, but I was in the 90s, I
Oh
think.
yeah.
But like, I lose almost all of them, in between, because I've gone back to it a couple times to pull the example and stuff like that. And the ones that I remember are the ones that are significant to me somehow, right? Like that
Yeah.
there's some reason, there's something about the country, like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, um, Ethiopia and Eritrea are near each other and they've got kind of similar cultures. So that's going to help me figure out which one's Ethiopian, which one's Eritrea. Or, like I've been to Ghana and Nigeria, so I'm going to remember those kinds of things. And so it was learning stuff in a decontextualized way and memorizing things that way, not that helpful because you're going to lose it, right? It's almost always
Mm.
about learning it in context if you possibly can. So like, yeah, sure, like the pure memorization tasks are worth it if we're trying to get somebody to 100%. And so we need to kind of overlearn some of the less common ones or, just as a foundation to get started with. But unless you're reinforcing it with, something around why is this meaningful? Why do I care? How am I going to use this? This
Hmm.
stuff's going to degrade pretty quickly and we're going to forget about it. So information and knowledge is almost always better learned in context because it's going to be more meaningful and you're going to hang on to it longer. And so that's a piece of it too, right? Why do I care about this? How do I learn it in a way that is meaningful to me or gives me something to do with it? There's a guy who blogs a lot about math education that I really like, Dan
Mm.
Meyer. He's been writing a lot about AI. And he's finally backed off of it a little bit lately because I think he just was tired, or
Yeah.
needed to direct his attention elsewhere. But he was talking about the issue with like the AI tutors, and he's like, look, a lot of these technological solutions to help people learn about math are catering to a subset of the students who are good at being self-directed learners.
Yeah.
So when they look at things like Khan Academy, they look at it and they say, all right, this is a great tool, definitely. But when they try to measure the efficacy of Khan Academy, they have to throw out something like 95% of the logins and not collect data from it because those are people who haven't used it enough to actually have any measurable results from it. So 5% of the people who log in, and granted, I had a Khan Academy login for a while just because I wanted to go look around, not because I was going to use it to learn
Right.
algebra. So it's appropriate for them from a study point of view to throw away my data. But presumably, some of those people who signed up meant to use it and didn't. And so when we look at, is this a good technology based tool for learning? What audience are we serving? Well, again, if it's a self motivated audience who's good at regulating their own learning, well, that's great, but that's playing on easy level, right? That's not addressing all the people who need more support than that.
Yeah, and
So,
that's where yeah, oddly enough, I have a anecdote on Eritrea and Ethiopia,
do you
which
really? Okay.
you will get.
Okay.
I don't know if we have time. We got a little bit of time, so I'll tell you this story just because you brought it up. I feel like I
Sure.
need to give you a cookie because you've learned this thing. Um, so I had this Uber driver
Hmm.
on the way to Seattle, Seattle's
Hmm.
airport, and he's from Eritrea. And
Hmm.
this, I have never met a more proud person of his country than this
Oh,
gentleman.
nice.
And he's talking about how they won their independence and blah, blah, blah. And he's also kind of at the same time, like bad mouthing Ethiopia. He's like, yeah,
Oh, okay.
like we won our independence from them. Like, he's like, these people, they think that we're just like a city within there because so many people just think that, but we're our own country, we're our own thing. And I'm like, oh, yeah, really interesting. And just so passionate. My next driver coming home was from Ethiopia. And I'm
Okay.
asking him, and I'm like, tell me, and and he couldn't really care. He's like, oh, yeah, I'm from Ethiopia. It's okay, whatever. And I'm like, you know what's so fascinating? My last driver was from Eritrea. He goes, that's not a country. That's just like a city of our town.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I mean, that to me, that really interesting. That taught me tremendous perspective, actually,
Yeah.
of like,
Hmm.
where you sit and like,
Hmm.
like the golden rule, he who has the gold has the, makes the rule kind of
Right, right, right.
sometimes,
Yeah.
right? And like the lion doesn't concern themselves with zebras. So, really helped me put a little bit of things in
Yeah, but now
perspective.
if you were playing the map game to learn all the countries of Africa, you would have a very different, like
I,
you
I
would have a
actually know
whole
where they
different
are because
relationship
I
with,
had to
yeah.
look it up, and I
Yeah.
looked it up, and so but speaking of that, so kind of coming all the way back, right? So afterwards, I actually went and learned a little bit more about both these countries because it was so
Hmm.
fascinating. I learned where they were because I was like,
Hmm.
how close are they? What is their significance of where they're positioned? And you just brought up, we threw out all these other things because they looked in once, but it requires somebody who is self-directive, and I think that's actually one of the big things
Hmm.
that is one of the tides that can raise all boats, especially now with so much information and with the
Hmm.
ability of being able to pull an answer from a Gen AI agent, is this idea of curiosity. And the more curious you can come, the more curious you can kind of leave people. And even in your while you're educating people, if you can make them curious about why something is
Hmm.
enough to care to go apply it or to go research or to go do whatever, I think that's a really big win. That's how I realized that I learned a lot about what I did with AI is because when I got a wrong answer and I was, I knew enough about the field to know it was wrong. I asked, well, why did you do that?
Hmm.
And what's fascinating is AI will tell you, like it tells you what it was thinking, which is really an interesting
Yeah.
way to get a peek into its
Yeah.
brain or whatever
Hmm.
brain, whatever computing power. But if you
Hmm.
can remain like curious, and so I think that's a big component, especially will be an even larger component of how we engage people and
Hmm.
like want to learn more because
Right.
they need to care enough to go do learning. I know you write a lot about, I forget what you title it, but I was reading some of your stuff and you were talking about like how do we get people to
Yeah.
care enough to learn. And I think at the high level it's like that curiosity almost.
Yeah, when we talk about, a lot of times when I'm doing behavior change workshops and stuff, people will be like, we want our learners to be more self-directed. And I mean, look,
Yeah,
we do. We want them to be like,
yeah,
oh, here are resources. I will go look this up. But this is not a simple equation, right? Like
no,
it's got to be useful enough to them. They have to see the utility of it enough, to do it. And so sometimes they've got a specific problem they're trying to solve, and so, what's the easiest way to solve this problem? Well, is it asking the person sitting next to me, which is less
yeah,
available now that so many people are working remotely, but is it doing a quick Google? Is it asking ChatGPT, or is it looking up in the resource bases that we spend a lot of
mm-hmm,
money setting up and, has answers that we think are right for our organization and things like that? Well, if you want people to do that, you have to kind of build that habit in them. They have
yeah,
to have experience of going there and finding useful information. They have to have an easy to navigate, like they have to know that they'll find it fairly quickly and that it might be faster than some of these other options, some things like that. And so, to go back to, the sort of the gaps piece, which is I still think where we started on all of this was, is it a
yeah,
knowledge gap? Is it a skills gap, which means it's something that people need to practice and maybe see a
mm-hmm,
lot of case
mm-hmm,
examples to start to get good at? Some of those more intangible or tacit skills? Is it a habit gap, which is, like I can have very good intentions about a behavior, like I really should floss every day or I should wear sunscreen, and it's just not a habit, like that.
oh
You can
yeah,
know what to do, you can want to do it, you can have the ability to do it, and it can still not be happening because it just isn't a habit that's built into your routine. And there aren't as many strategies I would like, but there are strategies to help people with that. And we can build that into our curriculum. How do we help people foster habits? Um, there's action planning, there's cue identification, there's practicing, there's a number of things we can do around that. Is it a motivation issue where they know what to do, but they still aren't doing it? In which case we go down a whole other rabbit hole of
oh
identifying what the issues are there. And that's where a lot of the behavioral science stuff can come in and be informative, because when you really start kind of scratching the surface, you find that, your assumptions about why people are or are not doing a particular behavior may be completely wrong. I
yeah,
was The last case study in the Talk to the Elephant book, which is the one about designing for behavior change, came from somebody named Manya Dotson, who was working with Japago, one of the NGOs, and they were trying to figure out how do we get more men in Nigeria to get HIV screened, right?
Mm.
And there were a lot of assumptions about what it was, right? Like they couldn't be bothered or they weren't interested or, and when they looked at motivators, they were like, well, are they going to be motivated by messages about being, a strong man protects his partner, kind of,
Right,
all of
right,
these
right.
sorts of things. And they did this WhatsApp group where they really spent a lot of time talking to people about it. And they had a real kind of aha along the way where what what they found was that getting HIV screened, that may have been one of the real issues was getting HIV screened is scary because your whole life's going to change if you get a bad result. And, these are people who grew up in the age of AIDS where, it meant you were going to
Yeah,
die,
died.
probably, and that's not true anymore because of the way the medications is necessarily true anymore because of the medications. But it was still a really scary thing to have to face up to. And the belief was your whole life's going to change. You're not going to be able to, you
Mm-hmm.
know, date the way that you want to, or you're not going to be able to like drink as much because you got to be healthy and you're not going to be able to have
Yeah.
fun and you're not going to be, and so what they found was a far more effective set of messages where, hey, the meds are really effective right now. It's one pill a day. It doesn't have to change your whole life. You're still going to be worthy of love. Somebody's still going to want to be
Yeah.
with you. All of these kinds of things. Like, let's try to diffuse. And you don't have to commit right away, but maybe, hey, start the conversation with us and you can decide down the road if you really want to get tested. But we're here to help you. And they had this whole thing about how you're the VIP and we're here to be, we're here to
That's
help
really
you with
cool.
stuff and, things like that. And this shift in the messaging away from let's try to almost guilt you into getting tested, versus
Yeah,
let's make this less scary and let's
and
make
this is
this.
like, yeah, this has been proven so many times. I think it
Mhm,
started like, I don't know, like in the 80s
mhm.
when they realized that lung cancer was becoming, well, they didn't realize lung
Yeah.
cancer was on the rise,
Mhm.
and they found the people least likely to get screened for lung cancer are people that smoked
Yeah. Hmm.
because they were like, they're like, I know I've got it. Like
Yeah.
what's even bother? Like and if I find out I have it, what am I gonna like? I'm gonna
Yeah.
have to lay in a bed and get chemo every day of my life. Like I'd
Yeah.
rather just keep smoking and not know. So that fear of uh almost the unknown,
Right.
the people that need to know the most sometimes are afraid to do it.
Right. Well, and,
Yeah, that
and just the fact that, we make all these assumptions about people. Like if
right.
if I had, $100 for every time somebody told me that people in their target audience are lazy, I'm just like, really? How'd you hire all the lazy people? That's a good trick. Maybe your hiring practices need some work. Everybody I know is so busy they can't see straight. Like, I don't know that many lazy people. I mean, I'm sure they exist. I'm sure they're out there, but
Yeah.
like how did you, and the truth is they're probably not lazy. They probably just have better things to do because everybody's got 37 things they're doing with every minute of every day. And we're trying to motivate them to take their compliance training. Well, there's a reason why that's not that compelling. Come on,
Yeah. 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 I mean,
so,
I feel bad when I take so I do the podcast from my house, and then I have an office that I can go into as well. And when I'm at my house, I almost feel like when I go down and like talk to my wife or take a little bit of time, like, oh man, I'm really like wasting time,
mhm.
versus like, if I was in an off when I'm in my office, I waste tons of time.
Right.
I don't even want to tell you how much time I waste just walking the hall. I was in her office in India last week. I just spent half the time, wasting time. It was not
Yeah.
wasting, but it was just like, hey, what's going on or whatever. And so, yeah, you're right. I don't think there's that many like just straight up lazy
No. Well, and I
people with
mean,
nothing.
like, we hear it from both sides, right? Like we're not supposed to be
Yeah.
optimizing, increasing efficiency, and all these kinds of things. And it's like, well, in those environments where we push so hard on efficiency, we know bad things happen, right? Like,
Yeah.
the Wells Fargo example was always the
Oh,
misaligned
yeah.
incentives, where we push so hard on, cross-selling target goals that people met them the only way they could figure out how, which was to sign people up for things without telling them. And hey, guess what? That's illegal. And it was a real problem.
Yeah, for those that don't know, Wells Fargo, especially their bankers, were incentivized to open up accounts, like checking accounts. If you had a checking account, open a savings account, like vice versa, open up an account for your mom. And so people would just, these tellers and other people were creating accounts, as you said, without even informing the customer, just saying, oh, they'll never know. You don't put any money in there. Boom, boom, boom. Come to find out, oh, I've got an account, or creating fraudulent accounts. Gosh, that's crazy. That was, I don't know how long ago it was, but you don't even hear about that anymore. It was like, it was so many years. That's why I was like, I had a buddy who worked for Wells Fargo, which is what, and he called me to open an account at one point, and I didn't. Well, maybe I did. Who knows? Who knows? But, we didn't get to cover one of the things we want to talk about, which was, how do we reduce cognitive load? But I think we covered so many more fascinating things that I hope people forgive us. And maybe we'll have you on. Definitely had to have you on whenever, I don't know. How long is the process from starting to write a book to it actually coming out? I know nothing about this.
My publisher, assuming like I haven't actually submitted the proposal yet, so this is all hypothetical at this point, but they're actually pretty quick. So with the elephant book, I dropped that in. I started writing it in January of 2020. Is it 2023? I guess. Yeah. I apparently can't remember anything anymore. And I turned in my manuscript in my final manuscript in May, and it was out by like August, but they're fast.
Okay. Well, then when you get published, when the next one comes out, we'd love to have you on, give away some books to some listeners. So let's have you back, and we can finally, I know everyone's saying, why didn't you get to the cognitive load? So maybe we can talk about that.
Yeah, no, we can totally talk about cognitive load. Just let me know. I'm happy to talk about that. That's a great topic.
I'm sure my Eritrea story was much more important than that.
We can do some super inside baseball about how John Swellers dropped Charmaine cognitive load from the model and stuff like that. So if you really want to get into the nerdy deep dive. But,
well, we can save that for a different time. But thank you so much for joining. This was a great session, Julie. We really appreciate it. And we'll definitely have you on soon again.
All right. Fantastic.
All right. Thank you.